G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here with the third and hopefully the final video in this series of building the Moderoid power loader from the movie Aliens. This kit, as you can see, I've put all the I've sort of put together a few of the sub-assemblies, and now it's a matter of doing the weathering process. So looking at some of the screenshots from the film, the weathering of this contraption is sort of a combination of scratches and scuffs and a thin sort of film of dusty oil or hydraulic fluid that sort of covers the whole thing. So if we start off by looking at this shot of Spunkmeyer, you get a really good close-up of the frame, and you can see on the right hand side there's these sort of scratches. You can see that there's sort of a grey, obviously a grey undercoat, and then a little bit of the metal shining through. You also get an idea of the grime that's sort of built up on the on the machine as well. So I'm going to try and replicate that as best I can, and there's going to be a few sort of steps involved. So the first step is the sort of scratches and scuffs. I'm going to start with those, and I'm just going to use a file, and I'm literally going to scrape away the yellow paint. The way that I painted this, there's actually quite a few layers of primer underneath, so I can safely sort of scratch away at the surface to that primer coat without too many problems. So I know some people will, and I've certainly done it in the past, where you use a sponge to sort of do some stuff, and I might do some of that in other areas, but for a lot of it I'm actually just going to be using a file. The other advantage of that is that a file it means that you can only really hit the sort of high spots where scratches and scuffs would naturally occur. Now, another really good example of what's going on as far as the weathering is when Ripley gets into the power loader, and you can sort of see the bits just past the foot. There's quite a few scratches there. You also get those that sort of grimy surface on the look of it. In some of these other shots, you'll notice that the sort of scratches and scuffs they're not all over the power loader. It's not like the whole thing's covered in scratches. It's sort of where you would expect bumps and things to happen. So certainly the feet get really scuffed up. The other thing that gets really scuffed up is the forks or the tines on the actual forklift part. So it kind of makes sense the way they've weathered it for the film. The rest of it, so we can see here a really good shot of Spunkmeyer, the back of his power loader. When we look at the actual back of the unit, the only sort of real weathering is obviously a bit of hydraulic fluid and oil stains, but not a lot of sort of scratches. So that's what I'm going to try and emulate. Now I think with the forks here, you can see that they're substantially sort of weathered down the sides of the forks, so I'm going to have to, I think, do that with a bit of paint, and it might be just a bit of either I'll be using this Vallejo metal color silver and maybe a little bit of burnt iron sort of mixed into it, so we'll see how we go. But first thing first is to get some sort of scratches happening where we'd sort of expect this thing to get knocked around a bit. Alright, so I'm going to start with the areas that I've actually got some reference to. So if we have a look at these bits here, the surface is going to be a bit scuffed. You can sort of start to see how that's working. So something like that. So the good thing about it is by using a file, it's actually kind of realistic. You're getting realistic sort of scratches and paint wear. you know, as you'd expect. Now I want to get a little bit in these corners. You know, so you're actually getting the real layers of paint, you know, chipping away on the surface. Now it is a little bit nerve-wracking, just given that you I spent all this time on the paint, and now I'm scratching it off. But it's kind of that's what you get as far as the realism of the surface being scratched up. Because I've used lacquer-based paints, these are quite tough as well, which means you do have to go in with a little bit of effort, you know, with the file, but that's a good thing because it gives you a lot of sort of control. And certainly on these leading edges here, you would have sort of scuff marks, and you would expect a lot of damage sort of on the leading edge, you know, on these edges of the feet here. So you really rough these up a bit. Yeah, getting sort of details, sort of scratches and stuff. And so it's really sort of catching those, yeah, those edges. You can imagine, you know, these things probably cop quite a beating. They're not going to be super clean. So you're getting those sort of different levels, because you got to remember when I painted this, I sort of started with the grey primer, and then I had white over the top of it and then yellow, so it's actually sort of giving quite a realistic look of the paint, how it would actually naturally sort of chip. We're just trying to have some reasonably naturally looking scratched up surfaces. Now with the cushions in here, I'm actually going to weather them separately, so I imagine they would be made out of some sort of vinyl or leatherette or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to sort of do them separately. I'm going to leave that one there. The thing with weathering, I mean, 1/12 scale, this kit is, which is great for weathering. But, you know, I am conscious I don't want to sort of overdo the scratches. They are quite, you know, they're not sort of all over the place on the loader. So. Okay, so looking at the arms are probably going to obviously have a lot of damage around these parts. So again, scraping over the decals. Sort of some pretty realistic looking scratches on that. Now, of course, everything's still gloss, so when I put a matte coat over it, I think it'll help as well. And I would imagine, you know, the arms would probably be another area that would cop a lot of you know, a lot of bumps and scratches. And when you think about, you know, humans, I guess, you know, elbows are always an area that sort of, you know, get scuffed, and, you know, knees and that sort of thing. So, you know, you just want to sort of think about in terms of where realistically these things would get knocked around. And it would be more so on the outside of the arm rather than the inside. You can see I'm being quite rough. Get a bit of randomness in there. You know, scratches and dents and that sort of thing should not be neat and ordered. They should be random and a bit all over the place. Okay, pretty happy with that. I think, look at the sort of scuffing and what have you on that. It's come up pretty well. Now the other thing is I might go in there with a bit of burnt iron just to, this silver in here is really too clean, so I might sort of scuff that up a bit with a bit of burnt iron. But, now one thing I do want to sort of highlight is that when I painted this, it had lots and lots of layers of paint. So that when it came to assembly, I actually had some issues. So I had some issues with putting the claw in. So if I take this out, I had to file off a whole lot of this peg here. And what happened is it actually started to split. So all the work that I'd done on the seams of this was all for naught, because when I forced it in, of course it forced the two halves of this claw apart, which was not great. The other thing is I've had a couple of splits as well. So where is it? It's one of these. Yeah, here we go. So when I forced this piece in, I got a split there, and I also got a split on, where was it? Was it one of the arms? I can't remember, but there's somewhere else I'm going to have to sort of cover up with a bit of weathering. So just if you are, painting this kit, you probably want to mask off all the pegs and the corresponding holes, or otherwise, yeah, it, in some places the plastic can sort of split and break, so just want to be careful of that. Hopefully you'll learn from my mistakes and not have that issue. So I think I've managed to clean it up as much as possible, and I've sort of, I guess I've hidden a few of the, I'll be able to hide a few of them with weathering, but still it was a bit disappointing, when I'm putting it together. It's like, I did all that work on the seams, and it was all a bit for naught. But anyway, we live and learn. Okay, so if we have a look at the cage, now the cage I need to be a bit careful about, because there is this the light in here, and I'm very conscious of the fact that the painting I did on this side is a little bit different to the rest. So there's actually black underneath here, so I'm not going to put too many sort of scratches on this side. I'll probably concentrate more on this side here. But again, it's about sort of picking all those areas where you would expect, I mean, it is a safety cage, so you would expect that it would get knocked around a bit. And it would be on the outside leading edges. So a lot of this inside area, of course, wouldn't be touched. And like I said, again, probably the back, not so much. But you might get, a few scuffs here and there. You imagine, Spunkmeyer's had a few to drink. Poor fella, I keep picking on him. He's had a few to drink, and out there loading up whatever needs to be loaded up, and he's hit a few of the pallets or something. So again, it's just about trying to make it reasonably believable as to where the scratches and stuff would occur. Things like these cylinders, they're kind of on the back, so it's unlikely you would get a lot of sort of scratches, but you might get sort of one or two here. So I'll just put a few in, I think. Alright, so I'm going to go through the rest and scratch the rest of it up, and then on to the next step. So I've gone through, done all the scratches. I'm pretty happy with the effect. You sort of get that texture as well of it, so it's come up good. Alright, so the next thing is to do some of the scratches and the blemishes actually with paint. So I'm going to start off with this burnt iron, which is quite dark, but then I'm going to go over the top with a bit of silver. And I've got a brush here. This was an old brush that I had, and you know, if you're doing a lot of sort of brush painting, never throw out old brushes, because you can sort of trim down the bristles and you end up with something that's pretty good for sort of dry brushing and stippling and what have you. So I've just got a little bit here on my tile that I use. And I'm going to brush a bit of it off on paper towel. And I'm going to go in there and just dirty it up. So given that these things are sort of the business end, if you like, of the you know, of the loader, they're going to cop the most abuse. So great thing about weathering is you do not have to be careful. Random is good. Okay, so finish up this one, and then I can compare it with the other one that I haven't done yet. And so when I'm doing stages like this, I will sort of do both at the same time, just so that I get some sort of consistency. Although, you know, the weathering shouldn't be exactly the same on all of them, it's important to get the same sort of level of weathering. So it's easy to sort of do that when you're doing both of them at the same time. Now, I don't do a lot of weathering on my models, as you probably know, for those of you who sort of watch my channel, because most of the models I do are quite small. But I gotta say, I am very much enjoying the weathering process. I know with the scratches and stuff, a lot of people might say, oh, you could do that with dry brushing. But what I really like is that sort of subtle transition from sort of the grey to the white to the yellow. You know, you get a really more believable weathering, I reckon, doing it that way. Alright, a little bit more on this one, and then we can compare the two of them. Okay, so chalk and cheese, these two. Chalk and cheese. Now, of course, it looks a bit dark, but I am going to go over it with the silver as well. But I just want to do these things up. So, do the other one. Next step is to take some layer metal colour silver. I'm going to do the same thing. It's just going to brighten it up a little bit. In the areas it's sort of dark. It's interesting because the paint's sort of sitting into the scratches there, so that's kind of cool. And of course the grime wash will go over the top of this. So that'll add another layer of weathering. Okay, let's have a look at these two. Yeah, that's pretty grubby. These little pieces in here are a bit of a dry brush. They're sort of metallic, I assume. So next step is to look at the grime washes I'm going to put onto this thing. I've been experimenting with a couple of weathering products, and I think I've landed on one that works reasonably well. So I'll bring this up and close. You can see there's kind of this subtle, you know, dust or dirt sort of in the recesses, and some sort of on the sides here. It is quite subtle, but it's all I want. I don't want to lose the sort of yellow, you know, undercolour. And I've also noticed that going back and having a look at the references to the film, a lot of these scratches, they've actually gone through to the metal. So here, for example, where it's sort of gone back to the grey, what I'll end up doing is putting a little bit of silver in there, just with a brush, just to add those sort of silver highlights that you actually see on the prop. So the if you compare this to one that I haven't actually done yet, you can see the effect is pretty subtle, but I'm actually happy with it, rather than having it sort of super clean like the one on the right here. So what I do to get there, I use this product. So this is a Vallejo acrylic product, and it is called Rain Marks. So, and the way I do it is, you need to make sure you give this stuff a really good shake. It does separate out, so I'm going to make sure give it a good shake. And the process is really simple and it's quick, and really it's just a matter of sort of getting a brush and brushing it all over the surface. Doesn't sort of matter, as long as you get in the sort of nooks and crannies of it, of the get it all in there. And I just do it a bit at a time, just because it's actually quite warm here at the moment, so it dries out pretty quick. But then I'll just dab most of it off, wipe a lot of it off, just using a paper towel. And what that does is it means this stuff sort of sticks in all those little micro scratches, you know, when I did the filing and everything, if there's any where I didn't quite get through to the, you know, the paint underneath. This stuff will settle in it, in those little micro scratches, and it just gives a really nice sort of, you know, dirty kind of patina without it going overboard. You know, this stuff's sort of an accumulation of dust and stuff. So you can see it's really quite subtle. You can see in the foot where you've got these little divots in there. Make sure you get some in there. And again, you're just sort of dabbing most of it off. The main thing is you don't want any sort of obvious brush marks. That's the main thing you're sort of aiming for. You really want it to sort of look as though it's as natural as can be. And you can do it, you know, you can build it up in layers. You can sort of do, you know, so for example, I think there probably should be a little bit more in here. I can just go in again and, you know, do this area here, and again just dab it off, and it will build up, you know, in layers quite well. Now if you've got any sort of problem areas where it's sort of you know, you got a little bit of streaking like this little bit here that I'm not happy with, what you can do is you can go in with some airbrush thinner. Now I use the Vallejo stuff just because this is a Vallejo product. What I do is just get a little bit of airbrush thinner here, and I just sort of gently wipe, and it comes off pretty easily. You know, it also helps to get a bit more variation in where the dirt is you know, sort of sitting. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then I can sort of move on to the next bit. So that's essentially the process. It's just you know, sort of painting it on, wiping it off. Now you can see there's a little bit more of a build up on the if I can get this out. There we go. So like here, for example, you know, a bit that's come through, I want to just remove most of that. And then obviously, you know, where the feet go, there would be a lot more sort of dirt and grime in there. Now because I can't necessarily get the paper towel in there, I can sort of go in there with a cotton bud and just sort of you know, clean it up a little bit. Need some on the front here. Wipe most of it off. So it is a pretty quick and, you know, excuse the pun, but dirty business. It's, yeah, I got to say, you know, I don't do weathering on a lot of my models just because, you know, because of the scale that I'm working at. But when I am weathering, I do enjoy it. It's good. I'm just not the best at it. That's I'm still learning. Okay, so you can sort of see there'll be a bit of stuff there. Now I might go in there too with a bit of silver, you know, just where it probably wear away eventually, or I've got to get I'm going to use the Tamiya powders, the weathering powders on some other parts, so I might go in there too with that. So that's that process. So I'm going to go through and do everything else. Of course, I'll do the arms. I think most of the dirt will be on sort of the outside. I'll do a little bit on the inside, but yeah, I don't want to sort of overdo it if I can. So I've finished using the Rain Streaks Vallejo product to just get in all the crevices, and it's a little bit of grime on the body of the unit, so I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing that I'm going to do is we have this mesh on the top and also this sort of mesh on the inside of the cockpit here. Now I would have liked to have actually used some photo etch mesh or something like that to replace this, but I couldn't find any that was sort of suitable. So what I'm going to do is use Tamiya's Panaline Accent Color Black, and at least it'll give the sort of illusion that it is a mesh. So using this stuff's pretty straightforward. I'm not doing Panaline, so I'm really just going to sort of, get lots of it on there. Be able to clean it up with some, what I use is Shellite, but you can also use enamel thinner. We'll do the same thing, or Zippo fluid. I just want to make sure I get the product sort of in all the little gaps, so that way it looks a bit more like the mesh that it's supposed to be. Alright, so that's that. We have this inside grill. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just touching it to the slots in there, and it sort of just wicks in. So now that's there. We'll let that dry properly. Just notice sort of some bits that I've missed. There we go. Okay, so I can put that to the side and let that dry off. Next thing is to add some sort of weathering effects to these pistons. So the pistons, I'm going to use two products for the oil sort of bits you might see on the ends of the piston rods. I'm going to use this Vallejo Mecha Color oil stains, and then for some extra sort of grease and what have you, I'm going to use this Vallejo engine grime. So I'm going to use a combination of the two products. So the first one I'm going to use is the oil stains. So I'm just going to put a bit on my palette here, and it's a black brown sort of colour, so it's kind of perfect. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a little bit sort of on around the top and the bottom, because that's where most of the oil is sort of going to build up. And I'm actually going to be pretty liberal with it, because I'm actually going to come back later and wipe a lot of it off. It's really about getting at the top and the base. Because when you look at pistons, of course, the actual, the bulk of the piston rod's quite clean and shiny, because it's sort of, going in and out of the piston. So I'm going to do the same thing on the leg here. Just go in there with a bit of this stuff at the base and the top. Now the next product I'm going to use, the grime. This will sort of go around the very base of the piston. So this is where all the stuff is, all the grease is sort of accumulated and ends up with dust in it and all sorts of rubbish. It turns into a blob of grime. And the other thing I'm going to do is use this on sort of some of these joints up here, so just sort of get in a couple where these piston joints are. And I'm not being that gentle with it, and the reason being is I'm actually going to come back with a towel and, paper towel, and actually get a lot of it off. So now I've got that sort of in place, you can sort of see how rough it is. I just go in there with a paper towel just to rub a lot of it off, and that way it sort of really just sticks in those crevices, which is where it would naturally sit. All right, so that one's done. And then we get some of the grime around the base of this piston, and again around some of these hinge joints. Now the other thing is I've got a crack in that. You can see where I push the pin in, there's actually a crack. So what I'm going to do is turn that into part of the story. So let's just say that, you know, some sort of oil leaking out or something like that. We'll actually use this grime to kind of, you know, make it look like it's supposed to be there. Alright, now we'll let that oil stuff just set up a little bit. It's getting there, and then I'll take some of it off with the airbrush thinner. So one thing I want to point out, something that I've already done, is I've used the grime on sort of where all the hydraulic hoses connect to the main body, and I was quite liberal with it on there, and then just all brushed it back with a bit of paper towel, so it tends to sort of sit in the grooves. But you would imagine that that's probably going to be a place where there's going to be a lot of grime and build up of crud. Also on these pistons here, these are the ones that go on the back. This ball joint here in the film, you can actually see that it is kind of really heavily greased up. So I'm going to use a combination of this stuff, just hose it on. And I'm going to use some of the oil as well, just a bit of a combination of both. So that way it gets all sort of oiled up, and yeah, it looks really gunked up a little bit, sort of going down the sides as well. So I'll do that on the other one as well. I've already sort of put a bit of the grime on, but I've put some of the oil stuff. And for these little pistons, these are the ones that go on the feet. And so in the movie you have a look at them, they are all silver. So to just break it up a little bit, I'm going to use a little bit of this oil, at least just to sort of delineate a bit between the rod and the cylinder. Probably gone a bit too thick, but I don't want too many sort of streaks in here. And just a little bit of the grime build up. I think I'll knock a bit of this stuff back. A bit of thinner after it's dried a little bit. And in fact, because these pistons are sort of so clean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of this grime over it, and then I can towel it off, just to give it at least a little bit of depth. That way you get some sort of marks on the cylinder, and it's not so kind of flat. Now those oil stains are on there, I'll just set them to dry a little bit. Now what I want to do is use some brush thinner. Make sure you're not using the cleaner. So I just pour some thinner into a little dish here with a cotton bud. And I'm going to go onto these pistons here and just knock back a bit of this oil. So we get an idea there's a bit of a blob at the top, at the bottom. And now it just looks like it's, you know, a bit more oiled up sort of thing. So I tend to find with these, you know, acrylic weathering products, they're good in the fact that you can sort of slow them on. And then you can kind of knock them back with, yeah, just a bit of airbrush thinner. So you can get some sort of pretty subtle effects. There we go. The base and the top of the pistons look pretty good. Alright, now back to the foot piston. I'm going to try and take the oil back a little bit. And so again, it's just about sort of keeping it to the top and the bottom of the piston rod there. So I'm going to go through and do the rest of it. I'll probably also do a little bit of work around around the forks as well, just because you would expect a bit of grease build up, certainly at the ends here. So there'll be a little bit I do in there as well. Time for weathering the cushions, and I'm simply going to use some Tamiya weathering powders for this. And so if I hold up the two of these, it's a little bit hard to see because they're still shiny, but this one I've actually done some sort of light feathering of some grey powder on it just to wear it up a little bit. This one's sort of very clean, whereas this one's got a bit of grime on. It's a bit hard to tell in the movie. I suspect, you know, in universe it's probably made out of some sort of vinyl. So it wouldn't sort of crack like leather, and you would expect it, you know, could also potentially be out in the weather. So it makes sense that it would be, yeah, some sort of vinyl or something like that. So it's not going to have sort of cracking in it as much as what leather would have. So what I'm going to do to weather these is to use the Tamiya Weathering Master Set E, and I'm just going to use the grey. And so I'll just get a little bit of this on the applicator. I'm going for all the high spots. So basically just running it along the top. And the good thing about this is you can just use your finger if you find that it's a little bit too a little bit too intense. You can just use your finger to rub back a little bit. And what I'm doing is sort of trying to concentrate on the edges a bit, but just to give it a bit of bit of differentiation around those edges. The same thing with this one. So, yeah, it's very difficult to show on camera. I'm sorry about that. It will become a lot more apparent once I've got a matte coat on it. That'll make a big difference. Then of course we've got the main back brace. Now I might go in here with these uprights on the back here. I might actually paint those silver, because I think if I remember rightly in the movie they're actually silver, so I'll give that a shot. Just using my finger to sort of graduate it a little bit. I imagine it'd be quite worn on the top just because it'd be more exposed to the elements. Work my way around all of the black padding areas and sort of work the powder into it. But I think that's all I need to do with these ones. So I'll work through the rest of those and then on to the next step. So I've done some final bits and pieces off camera, And just to explain sort of what I've done, the first thing is that I've used this Vallejo Model Air Chrome 71064 just to add a little bit of silver to some of these scratches I've made. So when you look at the film prop, they've actually used sort of what looks like silver paint, you know, to give the indication of dents and scratches. So wherever the scratches got sort of really bad and the ones that I filed, I've added just a tiny bit of silver. You know, it's just the scratches gone sort of all the way through to you know, through to the metal, the bare metal. So I've done that you know, on the claws as well. You can see just on that sort of edge there, it's just a little bit of silver. Not very much, you know, try to keep it subtle, but yeah, it's like the you know, the scratches have sort of gone all the way through the bare metal. So I've done that on all the sort of areas that have been scratched up. The other thing that I've done is I've added just an enamel wash to the seat belts. So that's just using a Tamiya accent panel line colour. The other thing that I've done is I've just brushed a little bit of the Tamiya weathering powder. So I've used this one grey, just to give it a little bit of texture and sort of, I mean, I'll be putting a matte coat on it, but yeah, just to give it a bit of variation so it's not just straight blue. Also use the chrome just to do the struts on that sort of head cushion, and you can see the probably see the effect of the weathering powders a bit more on the cushioning there. The other thing that I've done is I've cleaned up the enamel wash I put on here, and also in the vent. It's not ideal. It would have been better if this was an actual mesh, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. The other thing I've done is I have masked off the light because I'm going to give everything a matte coat. So I want to make sure that's covered up because I want to keep that clear. So everything's now ready. I'll do a final pass just to do any sort of final little cleanups, because once I put a matte coat on, I won't be able to sort of clean up anything else. I've started doing the plumbing on this kit, and I've started with the oxyacetylene torch. Now I started with this because I thought, oh yeah, start with the body stuff and then I'll worry about all this other, you know, hose shenanigans that's going on. I thought this would be easier to start with. Boy, was I wrong. So this presents some serious issues, this part of the build, and I have spent a good part of 4 to 5 hours trying to work out the best way around doing this. So a couple of things to sort of explain first. You do get 2 bits of wire. You get a red and blue bit of wire, and you can shape them. They've got a single metal wire core, so you can actually shape them. But the instructions and the kit doesn't give you any way of attaching it to the body of the loader. So I tried super glue, and the super glue did not adhere to the insulation on the wire at all. I tried UV resin, and the UV resin worked as long as I encapsulated all the way around the wire and the onto the cage, but it made too large a blob, so it was kind of problematic. I tried polystyrene cement, and that didn't work neither. So the idea that I originally had was to glue it in place and then use something to show how it's attached to the frame. If you look at this screenshot here, you can see they're using cable ties to actually hold it in place. So I wanted to glue it first and then use something to replicate the look of the cable ties. So I went down the path of, you know, when the glue didn't work, I tried wire, I tried cotton. The wire kind of worked, but the problem was I didn't have any black matte wire that sort of was fine enough that kind of looked to scale. So I tried electrical tape, which worked to a point, but electrical tape has too much give in it, so it actually would start to stretch over time. So in the end, I've used masking tape. and I'll talk about the process I use in a minute. But before I do, I just want to talk about, now the routing that they've showed for this, they show that the 2 pipes go behind the torch, and that's not actually correct. If you look at them in the movie, it actually goes along the front of the frame. So that's the sort of direction I've gone down. And then of course it sort of connects up in the bottom of the torch there. So I'll show you what I've done so far, and then I'll provide an example. Now I've done a lot of it off camera, and the reason is it is fiddly work, and you can see I think they're probably a little bit thick, but they're a lot more convincing than what I've had in trying a lot of the other bits. Now you'll see this bit of masking tape here. This doesn't actually have any, it's not black, that's only there temporarily to sort of hold it in place. But the plan is to have the cables going down the front of the cage, and then they will curve back up to the torch. Now as far as the path on the back, looking at the sort of screenshots of the film, it sort of comes along the back here and then across and down to the inlets here. You know, see the blue cables just popped out again. Now for the red cable, I actually had to drill this hole out a little bit, so I had to go up to sort of a 1.3 mil drill just to drill that out to get the wire in there. So I don't know whether that was because I'd painted it or whatever, but I just need to hollow out that hole a little bit more. So this is kind of where I'm at the moment. You can see I've sort of got a bit of wire here, sort of holding it, just holding it in place. So for this process, I'd highly recommend you use a bit of thread or use a bit of wire or something just to hold it down in place while you do the actual, sort of cable tie devices. So what did I end up using? I ended up using this Azu tape. So this is like, to me, a masking tape. The difference is that it's 0.4 millimeters. I wanted to get it as thin as possible. So if you think in, when you're sort of looking at the scale of things, the cable ties in the movie actually look quite narrow. So I wanted to get really quite thin. You can use Tamiya masking tape. It doesn't matter. This stuff's quite expensive. So you can use sort of standard Tamiya masking tape. You just need to cut it, in fine strips. What I like about this stuff is it's already pre-cut, so it makes it a bit easier to have that sort of consistency in what it looks like. So that's the tape I use, and then to colour it, what I do is I take a ceramic tile that's nice and clean, make sure it hasn't got any crap on it, because you want this stuff to stick really well. And what I'll do is I'll lay it down on the tile. And I might just do a bit of it just because I don't need a lot more. Cut that off. This stuff is very fiddly to work with, but it seems to be working so far. Alright, now the reason I've got it on a tile is because I just take a black marker, and this is how I colour it. So because it's stuck down the marker, it means I'm only getting the black on the top side of it. Then I'll let that sit and dry for a bit. Now I've done a couple of here previously, so I can cut these. I'll get this out of the way so it's not flaring out the video, but you can see how sort of thin that is. And then what I'll do is I'll start it on one side. I'm sort of going to start it there, sit down with my fingers and slowly wrap it around. And what I'll do is I'll actually wrap it around a couple of times. Problem is this wire's just moving around too much. Alright. There you go. Sort of looks like cable tie. Now you can see that the frame's got a bit messy, and a lot of that is because the experimentation I did with glue and wire and all that sort of thing, but that's alright, it's part of the weathering. But you can sort of see that that's kind of how it works. Now, for these top ones, I actually had to drill a couple of holes. So you can see I've drilled a couple of, I think they're 0.8 mil or 0.7 mil holes, because the mesh isn't real mesh. I had to drill holes to get the tape to be able to wrap it around. So that was really fiddly. I used just a standard bit of Tamiya masking tape just to sort of hold this in place. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be bending it back up into the torch, and I don't want to be sort of pulling on this. I am aware that this is only masking tape and that, you know, it's not that strong, so I don't want to be putting too much unnecessary force on it. Yeah, I might do another one of these just to show you sort of how I go about wrapping around the wires at the back. And when you look at the movie, there's actually quite a few sort of cable ties on the back. Which you can probably start to appreciate. This is very fiddly work, which is kind of hilarious given it's a 1/12 scale kit. You know, I'm used to doing fiddly stuff on very, very small kits. But of course, the higher or the larger the model is, the more detail you would expect to see. And there we go, there's another one done. Now these type of markers that I've used, these permanent markers, you'll notice I've got it on my tile here, and this is my tile. I normally use the palette. What works really well at cleaning this stuff off a tile is my custom airbrush cleaner. So I've done a video on that before, which is 2/3 diluted water, distilled water, and 1/3 butyl glycol. So you know, it works really well at cleaning this stuff off the tile. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them, and then we'll start on the rest of the plumbing. Okay, so after a lot of fiddly work, I finally got the cable ties on the oxyacetylene hoses and hooked them up to the torch. So the next bit is the hydraulic hosing, which all sort of comes off the back here. And I wanted something that looked like a hose clip. So I've tried two things here. One is I've coiled a bit of very fine wire around the base there, so it's almost like a spring. And the other one is using aluminium tape. Now out of these two, I think the aluminium tape is the best way to go. So that's probably the method I'm going to use. So I will throw some of the Vallejo oil wash over the top of that to dirty it up a little bit once I've sort of got them in place. But yeah, I think that looks a lot better. This literally just does look like a spring sort of wound around it. So that's the method I'm going to use, and I want to talk about some of the issues around this piping stuff. First of all, it doesn't hold its shape, so it is quite it's got a memory which is going to be problematic, because when you look at these hoses in the movie, a lot of them sag, you know, gravity's sort of working on them. So what I could do is use an old modelling trick, you know, a lot of car modelers use, is where I'm going to actually insert some wire into this, which will give it the ability to hold its shape. So it's just something simple like that. The wire I'm using is it's called stem wire. It's used by florists to, I believe, support stems of flowers. So you should be able to get this at any sort of craft shop or hobby shop. And I just bought it in sort of a pack like this. But it's good. It's nice and flexible wire. It's the right diameter, so it's good. The other issue that we have with this pipe is that it's actually quite difficult to get onto the pegs. So I'm just going to use some needle nose pliers just to sort of stretch the end a little bit. You could use hot water, but you'll need something to get it started, just because it is really quite tricky. So I'm going to start with getting it on this one. Good, move on. There we go. Yeah, I don't think that's going to come off in a hurry. And then the next thing is to get a length of wire in there, but of course we want the wire to be shorter than the actual piping, because we don't want it interfering with where it connects. So I need to take a bit off that. Yeah, that should be fine. I'm going to force that in. And then I might use the tweezers just to push it in further. I might even use another bit of wire. There we go. Alright, now thankfully with this control stick here, we can actually take that out and connect it. So it's going to make life a little bit easier. And to, of course, just stretch out the end a little bit. And it goes in the bottom here. Alright, now I should be able to shape it. There we go. So now, because we've got the wire in there, I should be able to give it sort of at least the look of the hose having a bit of weight. So if I was sort of doing this without the wire in it, it would it would certainly sort of pop up a bit more and pop out. So I think that'll be good. And get that sort of weight. And the final step is to use the aluminium tape. So I've got a big roll of aluminium tape here, used for ducting or air conditioning, whatever. And what I've done is I've cut a 7mm wide strip, and I've attached it to my tile here so I can cut it into fine strips. Now I'm holding it with the tape just because, or otherwise it slides around all over the place. Okay. The other good thing about this aluminium tape stuff is that it holds its shape as well. I'm going to take off the backing paper, which is quite fiddly. Get that out of the way. Trying to get this on camera. I'm going to wrap it around. On the hardest bit is getting it started. Now I'm just wrapping it around the back so that the join is not visible where it's going to be seen. Well, not visible. The join's not visible in an obvious sort of spot. So I reckon that'll work alright. Like I said, once I put some sort of oil effect over the top of it, I think that will make a big difference too. It has been a long time since a kit has frustrated me this much. These plastic tubes, even with the wire in them, are just rubbish. I have had, you can see how mangled the end of that is on both of them. It was just a real struggle to get them over the pegs without them sort of coming off. Yeah, just a nightmare. So I had to look for another solution, and what I found was this stuff, which is, it's a form of wire. But it's a silicon wire, and so this has an outer diameter of 1.5 millimeters. It's a multi-strand, so it's not really moldable, which is not sort of ideal, but it does tend to sort of lie a bit more naturally than this stuff without a wire in it. So I'm going to show you how I go about it, because I'm going to do something that really you should never do with modelling, which is get very hot surfaces next to the models. But I digress, I will get there in a minute, and you will see me using a heat gun near my model, which is just terrifying. Needless to say, I'll show you what I've done so far, so you get an idea of how it sort of looks. Now there's a couple here that I haven't connected yet, but you can sort of see that what I've used is heat shrink. So I've still got little silver bands there from the aluminium tape that I've sort of created for the other ones, but yeah, I've actually used heat shrink, and maybe you can sort of see in there, and I have actually sort of heat treated it, so I've sort of got the heat gun to shrink it on, or otherwise there was no way of sort of attaching it to the different pegs. So I'm going to show you the process that I used. The other thing I use is this 1.5 millimeter black heat shrink, and I cut this to the length of about 7 millimeters. So I've sort of got a little tray of them here that I use, and I'm going to use this arm as an example just because it's going to be easy to sort of show on camera. So this has still got the old one on it, so I'm just going to pull that off gently. Okay, so yeah, even though this one kind of worked alright, a lot of the other ones didn't. I may find a use for that tubing, you know, at another state, on another project, but we'll see. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is connect the side on the actual on the arm here. So I'm going to take my 7 millimeter long bit of heat shrink. I'm going to sort of plonk it over the peg, and then while using the heat gun I'm going to hold this in place so it will sort of set in there. I'm going to have to sort of do this on the bench, so I apologise if it's not super clear. Now the type of heat gun I use is one of these, I think this is a Portasol. It's a gas soldering iron, but it also comes with a little blowtorch attachment or heat gun attachment. So I'm literally going to start this thing up. And I'm going to give it the quickest whack of heat, because of course we are talking about plastic here. Not only that, but we're talking about plastic with paint on it. So you don't want a lot of heat on it, but you can sort of see the effect. It is far from ideal, but it was the best that I could sort of do. Now for this particular piece, I'm going to have to hold it with a bit of blue tack, I think. So again, just over the peg, I'm going to slide a bit of heat shrink, and I will hold this in position while I hit it with some heat. You really don't want to give it that much heat because there's a plastic peg that it's attaching to. The peg will melt. So I've had that actually happen in a couple of places. So you want to sort of get that fine line between where the heat shrink sort of shrinks without, you know, melting the peg. Whoops. And it looks like that will need a bit more heat because it's just popped off. So, let's see. You can see how quick I am with the heat. I do not want it to be in there too long. But that looks a bit better. And then I take my 7mm wide metal tape, aluminium tape, which I've cut into very fine strips. So I'm just going to take one of these off. Out of the way. So you can see how sort of fine these are. And then I'm going to lay it on here and wrap it around to just give a bit of an indication of a, you know, hydraulic clip. Okay, so see what that looks like there. Alright, yeah, so you sort of get the idea. You know, it probably doesn't hang as well as it sort of should, but it's better than the plastic tubing that sort of comes with the kit. So it's kind of a bit of a compromise. There's a lot of things about this kit that are sort of a little bit compromised, but at least it'll give the impression of the hydraulic hoses around the various bits of the loader. I have done, of course, pretty much most of this side. These two loose ones that hang off are for this major pistons that hang down, and I'll be doing them last just because everything else is going to get in the way. But you can sort of get an idea. You know, it is a bit of a rabbit's warren, bit of a mess, a lot of stuff going on. I don't know whether I can use something to sort of hold a lot of these in place. I don't know. I mean, when you look at the movie set, you know, when you look at the movie props, the hoses are pretty kind of all over the place. It doesn't look like they've been very well sort of organised. So it doesn't sort of worry me too much, I don't think. I'll just try and guide these things so that they, you know, they look as though they hang a bit more naturally. The other thing that I like about this particular wire is it actually has text on it. So any of you have sort of seen hydraulic piping and stuff, there'll always be like a brand name or, you know, the type of hydraulic hose. So it's kind of just that little bit of extra detail that I get on the wire that you don't get on this. Another thing is the fact that they are slightly different sort of, it's really hard to tell there, but the stuff that comes with the kit's really shiny, whereas this silicone stuff has it still has a bit of a gloss to it, but it's a lot less intense. So I kind of like the texture of that more. So, you know, there was a lot of stuffing around, a lot of, you know, cursing and carrying on to try and work out how I was going to go about it, but inevitably it is, you know, some heat shrink and using some different wire. Once I got the process sort of sorted out for my cabling, it all happened, and as a result we get this. It is just madness. But I'm reasonably happy with the result. Look, I sort of think the the way they've handled the hydraulic hosing in the kit is a bit of an afterthought, which is a bit of a shame. But once it's sort of all in place, it does actually sort of look pretty good. And I think the connection points I've done for the hoses also looks okay. On a lot of them, certainly around the pistons and on the back, I've actually gone over with just a bit of the oil Vallejo FX weathering stuff, just to dirty it up a little bit so it's not so bright. But effectively the main bulk of the loader is done. So I'm gonna hold off sort of showing you all lit up and everything until I've got the figure sorted. Ta-da! The figure is done. So now it's a matter of actually getting her into the loader. Now there's a peg that goes on her back. So I need to get that in. Okay, so for those of you playing along at home, put these in the bottom slot, and that way Ripley will fit better. So I'm sort of getting her shoes in first. And the peg will line up with the top hole in the chair. Now it's a matter of trying to get her hands in a sort of reasonable pose if I can. Okay, so that's sort of what she looks like there. Now I'm going to get the try and get the seat belt on. I think once Ripley's in here, she is not coming out again. Alright. So, yep, there she is. She's got the full harness on now. Okay, now I can bring this down. And I think we're in. Alright. So, head's pretty tight in there. It's actually rubbing against the top bar there, which is not really ideal, but I guess once she's in there it doesn't really matter that much. Alright, so time I wrap it up. What do I think of this kit? I think it's a really good kit as far as the actual loader goes. It's got plenty of articulation. The way you can sort of pose the tines on the forks is really good. It's got lots of sort of detail. It is missing some of the detail sort of in the lower foot here. There's sort of some extra hoses in the actual prop, but generally it actually looks pretty good, and it's the proportions are all seem pretty good to me. As far as the problems go, I've already spoken about the hoses that are included in the kit. However, if you can find an alternative, it is kind of good that at least they've considered it, so you have somewhere to put sort of alternative. If you find some alternative hose to use, you can actually do that. The other thing that I had a problem with was the figure, which you can find out more sort of in the video of the figure. And speaking of that, I have done the figure as a separate video, which will be up the same time as this one. The reason for that is I know some of you are probably not interested in figure painting. I'm by no means an expert, so it's just to take you through what I did to sort of get the figure painted as best I could. So yeah, look, it's a good kit. It was reasonably priced. I really hope that Good Smile Company continues, hopefully maybe do a couple of other things from the Alien franchise would be great to see from them if they've got that license. I don't know, they might have just a limited license. So. But yeah, I think it's really good representation of the loader. For those of you interested, I spent about 80 hours working on this, so it wasn't a quick project by any means. I think a lot of the time was spent with the sorting out the electronics, a lot of puttying and filling seams, and also the hoses. So if you're not too fussed about those things, then you probably get it done a bit quicker. And also I spent quite a bit of time on the weathering. Alright, so on to the glamour shots. Until the next build series, I'll catch you later.